We've changed around what we usually do, and what we're going to do today is we're going to have some presentations here. We have Claire McGettrick from Justice for Magdalene's Research, who is an absolute warrior for the women. She is just mighty. Claire is going to give us a bit of a presentation on why we're here, what we're doing, and who we're remembering, and what plots we will see later. We're going to have a tribute to our friend Martina Keogh, who was a survivor and who spoke with us a number of times, and we remember her, and she sadly passed away. So we're going to have a tribute to her after that. And we're also going to hear from our TD for Dublin Central, Mary Lou MacDonald, who's also with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Claire McGettrick from Justice for Magdalene's Research.
Okay. I suppose first of all, I just want to. Can everybody hear me? Yes. I just want to thank Anya once again for. It's Anya's brainchild, this event, and it started 5 years ago here. A simple idea, and it's still a simple idea. It's just come along, lay some flowers, remember the women. I'm just flabbergasted at the people that are here today. It's just amazing. And from what we're hearing around the country, and since last year actually, every town and city that had a laundry has been represented. And what we're hearing around the country is that similar crowds are coming along. Thank you so much, because these women were disrespected in life, and now we're going to honour them and make a fuss of them at least once a year. I just want to give you an idea of, first of all, what we do as Justice for Magdalene's Research, and just particularly in terms of the graves. And you know, we have many other wings to the organisation, but today is about the women who are no longer with us, so I'm going to predominantly focus on that. So just a little bit about ourselves. We were founded as JFM in 2003. We grew out of the original Magdalene Memorial Committee, who were formed actually on foot of the exhumations at Hyde Park, where there were, I'll talk to you in a minute about that, where there were 155 women exhumed for the sake of property development, and they were reinterred here at Glasnevin. So when we discovered that there were inaccuracies and anomalies, which I'll tell you about in a minute, we formed in 2003. Our political campaign began in 2009, and then once the apology came, we decided to exit the political arena for the most part, and we founded JFM Research. We're a survivor advocacy group, and we are not-for-profit and totally volunteer. So there are 5 different groups of Magdalene laundry survivors and victims. Those who speak out, those who live in silence, those who are still dependent on the religious congregations, and there are over 100 women around the country in that quote, the women who died, who we're here to remember today, and those who are left behind, the families, including adopted people who discover their mothers were in Magdalene laundries. So from JFM's perspective, the organisation founded in 2003, our aims and objectives were an apology and the establishment of a compensation scheme. JFM Research, we're moving into the transitional justice portion of our campaign, and you know, in legal speak, our aims are to research Magdalene institutions, to provide information and support to the women. For the sake of the women here today, for all of you, it's about remembering the women. It's about ensuring that there's a legacy, ensuring that we never let something like this happen again, because it is happening again in places like Ars Attracta, where you have cases like Grace happening again and again and again. we haven't learned. It hasn't hurt enough, clearly. So we need to learn, we need to understand, and that's why it's so important. So that's what we're about, leaving a legacy. That's the Sunday's Well grave. Some of you will have heard me speak before about women who are buried behind a 12-foot wall in an inaccessible grave. That's as close physically as we could get to it. You can also get up on the 12-foot wall if you're brave enough. It's a steep descent to get down to the grave. We needed ropes, please. Believe it or not, and that's as, you know, it just says it all for me, that photograph. It's our friend Fiona Ward took it. So another part of our work is we support the Oral History Project, so that the living women, they feel very, very strongly about having their story as part of the historical record. And the Names Project, which is much of what I'll talk about today. We want to ensure that every woman who lived and died behind Magdelene laundry walls is acknowledged and respected. So what we do is we will collate information from Magdelene graves, from census records, from exhumation orders, electoral registers, newspaper archives, anything that makes them much, much more than just a statistic of 10,000 women who lived behind Magdelene walls, you know. There's an idea of some of the graves. You'll recognise some of them from today. But there are others, many, many others. That's just a small sample. If you look in the one on the top right, that's out in Dean's Grange. That's a grave of one woman from Dunleary. It's not marked. She's with strangers, actually. She's on her own. You know, we're going to be here for a while doing what we do. So one way that the women who passed on have kind of helped us, for want of a better way of putting it, is in terms of duration of stay, because the McAleese report alleges that the average length of stay for most of them was less than a year, and that, you know, the average, even the kind of, if you look at the upper figure, that the average was 3.22 years for 42%. However, from what we've seen, you know, the picture is entirely different. So I want to just give you an idea of some of the women that we've chosen, and they're in the sort of the legacy cases, what the McAleese report called the legacy cases, i.e. women who lived and died behind the walls that were there prior to 1922, but they weren't counted as part of the McAleese report. So this woman is Alice. I've protected her identity for today. She was in Peacock Lane. That's her census record. She was 29. She could read and write, and she was from Cork, and her occupation was recorded as a laundress. So that's 1911. So she could have been there before 1911. We don't know. We don't have access to the records. So in St. Finbarr's Cemetery, we have an Alice O'Kay, and she died on the 26th of November 1961. And if it is the same woman, she was at least 50 years behind laundry walls. It's a lot different to 3.22 years. Agnes, you'll be visiting Agnes's grave today. Agnes is in the High Park Laundry. In 1901, she was recorded as 28. Could read and write, from Dublin. She was an inmate and a laundress, according to the census records. She's there again in 1911. And we have her in the High Park grave here in Glasnevin from August 1967. So that makes it about 66 years at least that Agnes would have been in High Park. We don't know yet. We're still, believe it or not, how many years later, after the exhumations at High Park, we're still trying to unpick that situation. So we don't know whether she's one of the women who were exhumed or not. Margaret, this one is just, this particular case, for me, just epitomises, you know, this whole situation and how just utterly disrespectful the McAleese report was to the women who died in the laundries. Margaret was in Limerick in 1911. She was 18 and she was from Carlow. Now we've looked at the electoral registers from the 40s up to 1983 when the laundry closed in Limerick. Now they didn't start recording the women until 1961, and Margaret appears in every single year. You know, so the notion of women coming and going, you know, it didn't happen. They didn't come and go. No, she was there every single year. And then in Mount St. Oliver Cemetery in Limerick, we have a Margaret M who matches these details, who died in December 1985. That's a minimum of 74 years behind Laundry Wall. Now, she spent her whole adult life there. If that's the same woman, her whole adult life behind laundry walls. Now, because Margaret was there before 1922, and because she died after the laundry closed in 1982, she was excluded doubly from the McAleese report. Because those who were there before 22 and those who were there after laundry closures were not counted. And so it's an outrage to suggest that that is a legitimate thing to do for any government committed to eliminate somebody like Margaret from these records. So again, our work continues in that respect. Electoral registers, just to give you a very quick flavour, I'm conscious we're pushed for time. For the 1954 to 55 electoral registers for Hyde Park, 63.4% of them were confined for a minimum of 9 years. For the 55-56, there's 61.4% of them were there for a minimum of 8 years. In Donnybrook, again, you have a similar trend. 54, 55, 63.1% of them were there for a minimum of 9 years. Donnybrook 1955 to 56, 67.9% of them were there for a minimum of 8 years. In the registers for Hyde Park that we have between 54 and 64, 30% of them are in the grave. The grave we're going to visit now. And actually, our figures have probably been slightly updated in the meantime, and it's kind of coming close to 40-50% of them that are there. The same with Donnybrook, 54 to 64. The women, you cross-reference them against the names on the graves, and over 50% of them are in the grave. So, you know, that's just to give you, the photograph on the bottom there is of the Donnybrook graves. The women are older, maybe often two names per cross. It's slightly different to what you see today. And to bear those women in mind, we can't unfortunately visit every graveyard today, and besides that's behind convent walls, so they won't let us in, but just to keep them in our thoughts today as well. I'll very briefly run through the Hyde Park exhumations. You're going to see this grave today. It's the last grave we'll come to. In 1993, the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity, they wanted to sell some of their land at Hyde Park. They made a successful application to the Department of the Environment to exhume the remains of 133 women. During the exhumations, they discovered that there were more women there, more remains in the ground. So they applied for an additional exhumation licence, which was granted, and then ultimately 155 women were exhumed. The sisters said they couldn't produce death certs for 58 of the women, and 24 of them were under quasi-religious names, for example, Magdelene of Bernardine, Magdelene of Kevin, whatever. And then, as I say, 154 out of 155 of them were cremated and reinterred here at Glasnevin. That's a photograph of the reinterment in 1993. You can see some of the urns there and some of the members of the religious order. I understand from people that we had contact with at the time that nobody was notified from the Magdelene Memorial Committee, for example, or the public weren't notified that the reinterment was happening. And with the result that it was, and actually the reinterment took place at dawn, and only for reporters giving people a tip-off, nobody would have been there to see the urns. They just about made it on time to see the urns being lowered into the ground. That committee's work culminated in the bench in Stephen's Green, which is always worth a nice visit if anybody hasn't been to it. It's just a way of remembering the women that was erected in '95. But then in 2003, Mary Raftery, who's sadly no longer with us, it's because of her that we understand these difficulties. We didn't know this in '93. We didn't know about the lack of death certs, that there were, news reports around the time talk about 133 urns, but there were actually 154. As I've said, the Magdelene report a decade later did absolutely nothing. So our work is continuing, and thanks to the genealogical service here at Glasnevin, we've been able to kind of move things on a bit. Now, in many ways, we've more questions than answers, but I just want to, while we're actually here in Glasnevin, just acknowledge Glasnevin's services here, because only for them we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done thus far. And we've been able to look up these women's names to try and establish what happened, who is buried where. As I say, unfortunately, we've no more questions than answers, but we don't lay that blame at Glasnevin's door. This is down to the religious orders not caring enough about these women to ensure that their burial place is marked adequately and accurately, or not marked at all. So we did a search for the 187 names that are on that headstone. We couldn't find records for 131 of them, although I had a conversation with a member of Glasnevin Trust just before this presentation, and he tells me there might be a difficulty with more recent records. However, I did find 56 of them, and these women are buried in 4 separate locations at Glasnevin, and just 33 of them are there at that location. Now, what that means is that 56 women who are on that headstone as technically being exhumed and reinterred were already there. They weren't, they weren't exhumed. They weren't, and nobody cared enough in the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity to ensure that the names that were being provided were accurate enough. So we did extended searches here in Glasnevin for the 56 names, which will show you the other people who are buried with those women. And we found, I think we're up, actually the next slide says that we're up to 106 new names now of women. Sorry, I'll move on to the next slide so you can see it. We've 106 women who we didn't previously know about, and they're buried at seven separate locations here at Glasnevin. We've a map on our website for anybody who wants to look at that, and there's a key to the map with the different locations and whatnot. We also looked up the Gloucester Street, also known as Sean McDermott Street names. We'll visit this grave today. There are 51 names on this headstone, but not one of them are buried at that location. They're all buried around the corner at this grave. The women who are inscribed on this headstone, thankfully, are all in that location. So again, it's the Sisters of Our Lady of Charity, unfortunately, have not taken the care required just to ensure simply that somebody's name who's on their gravestone is accurate, so that if you are a family member of a Magdalene survivor or a Magdalene victim, that you can lay a flower at that grave and know that person is in that grave. It's not too much to ask, I think, of a religious order who benefited so much from the unpaid labour of these women. So we have further discrepancies, where we have
women who are in, there's 2 women across the road in St. Paul's, for example. Inexplicably, we don't know what Our Lady of Charity were doing there. So unfortunately, again, more questions than answers. I'm just going to quickly move on to Sunday's Well to give you an idea. This is another shot of the grave I showed you there. This grave is completely inaccessible. We brought inaccuracies to the intention of the Magdalene's Committee. No mention of it in the report. Just another woman who's buried in that grave, just to give you an idea. She was sentenced in 1932 to 12 months for concealment of her concealment of birth of her legitimate child. The judge said that the sentence wouldn't come into effect. Now she's sentenced to 12 months, but it wouldn't come into effect if she spent 2 years in the laundry. Now this was a frequent sort of a thing you'd find in the newspaper archives. However, we have found a Margaret G, who matches the same description, in that grave, who died in 1978. If it's the same woman, that's her death cert there. She spent 46 years. So that's 44 years on top of her original sentence. And, you know,
my God.
I'm wondering where the outcry is. I'm wondering where, you know, we asked the Magdalene's Committee to ascertain, you know, if it's the same woman, if the probation service followed up on her, you know, to confirm whether she decided, because that's an auxiliary's grave. Did she decide? Did she decide of her own free will? Was she off? Was it informed? But it was completely ignored. What this all amounts to for us is that we're not nearly done in terms of investigations. We're not nearly done. You know, the Magdalene's Committee was not as independent as we'd like it to have been. The Commission of Investigation was an opportunity to conduct a prompt, independent and thorough investigation into allegations of abuse in the Magdalene laundries, as recommended by UNCAT. However, 14 institutions are on the schedule to the Commission of Investigation, inexplicably. It's not sufficient. We need an open, transparent investigation, not something that again compartmentalises what happened to women and children in this country. We need to understand the whole picture of what happened, because again, as I said earlier, it is happening again and again and again. We need to understand, we need to honour these people so that what happened did not happen in vain, you know. So, last but not least, I want to keep an eye on Frankie and Sam, and I need to get my couple of words ready, and my apologies that they're coming from a couple of sources where this is Martina Keogh, and Martina was here a couple of years ago with us, and I don't, where do you even start with Martina? You know, I can't believe we don't have her with us anymore, and so I'm just going to say a small few things, because you know Martina herself is going to. We have footage of Martina herself, and she's the main woman. But first off, just to say thank you so much to Sam, to Frankie, and the members of Martina's family who've come here today. It's such an honour to be here. And I just want to share one small anecdote that I have that for me epitomises Martina, and then I just want to share a couple of words from my colleague Catherine O'Donnell, who's pictured with Martina there, and it was Catherine who knew Martina best. But I first met Martina in 2010 in June, and it was on a really difficult day, let's say. We did a meeting with the Department of Justice that morning, and the officials had told us, listen, you haven't a hope of getting an apology, you might as well start negotiating now. And we were getting it in the neck from a few quarters that day, so it was one of those days, and our colleague Professor Jim Smith was giving a presentation, a lecture in Boston College here in Dublin, and so we were all gathered, and you know, you could cut the tension with a knife. It was just incredible, and but every so often the tension would be broken by a ringtone with the Benny Hill theme tune blaring out, and the old Martina would get up, like without a care in the world, would go out to the foyer, take her cough, and come on back in again. And you know, and I thought, my God, you know, and I had a long chat with her that day out in the foyer, and I thought, you know, like what you see is what you get. That's Martina Keogh. And you know, we loved her dearly. We absolutely loved her dearly. You know, and that never changed. You know, what you saw is what you got. So look, I want to just say a few words from Catherine. As I say, I think, you know, Martina would probably, if she was here, would tell you, you know, all that Catherine did for her. But I think, you know, Catherine would be saying the opposite, that, you know, she, as always, when you have a Magdalene survivor in your life, you know, you get more than you give, you know. So Catherine just sent me these few words this morning, and that's what I'll leave you with. She had the strongest mind I have ever met. She was the bravest person I have ever met. She taught me how to be brave, or at least a bit braver. She showed me how important it was to keep loving, to love animals and our family and our friends. She believed that we had to help the weak and the suffering, especially animals who she thought were mostly much nicer than humans. She told me that she prayed to her angels to look after me. I never felt that worked. I miss her a lot, but in the last few months I am now sure that I have an angel looking after me, and she's marvellous. Thank you.
Day is International Women's Day, and I think as an Irish woman I cannot imagine a more appropriate or more important way to mark International Women's Day from an Irish perspective than to remember the women and the girls of the Magdalene laundries, because the experience of those women, of those girls, really demonstrated the very, very worst of Irish society, of our collective prejudices, of our negligence, and of how hard the system and the citizens could be to each other. And today, as Lynn has said, it's the third year that we've met here to remember, to commemorate, to honour the memory of those women and girls. But a gathering like today is about much more than looking back. It's also about looking to the here and now and looking to the future. And the Magdalene women and girls suffered most grievously. I think the most grievous wrong, to my mind, done to so many of them is that they were denied, even in death, their identity. I cannot imagine a more degrading, a more humiliating act towards any human being as to deny their very existence and personhood. So when we meet here today and we lay our flowers, we shout their identity out loud and clear, and we say, we remember you, we see you, we hear you, and we vow that this will not happen again on our watch. It's a year since the Taoiseach took to his feet to apologise to the women in the Dáil. And a year on, we still wait for the delivery of compensation and of services to those women. So let today, in its own modest fashion also be about all of us women and men and children, girls and boys of Ireland saying that this is not good enough. We demand justice for those women and for the survivors now.
I was sentenced to Justice Street for a very minor crime, which today would be classed as very minor, which I wasn't even involved in. For about 2 years, but when I was sent there, I was brought in, my name was taken off me, my clothes and spoons were now grey dress. My name was never mentioned by the nuns again. It was either you or her. That was it, because my mum wouldn't let me give me a new name. But I've seen all the old women, they all stuck around my were very, very old. They were working like as if they were 20 years of age. They were made feed all the big machines. Oh, it was really sad, so that they died there. We were up in Hyde Park for the funerals, which was very, very stressful. Because it was very cold, and we were just struggling in our box and put in the grave, and that was it, and we were sent back. But I'd like to wish all the women that's alive today well, but sorry for all the women that didn't get the apology that we should have when they were alive. But again, nobody listened to us. 15 years ago I brought it up to Sinn Féin about the Magdelene, and I was sure that they wouldn't listen to me. But now I'm glad Mary knew, and delighted Mary. I really, really appreciate her. And thanks again, Mary, and Claire and Kathy and all them for bringing the nuns to justice. We wouldn't have started only for them. And I would like again to thank everybody for all that we've done for the youth we took. Thanks.
Let this be a lesson to everybody. Keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, speak out. It is a shame what happened to you. It's a shame. You're a star. What's that?
There are 5 groups of Magdelene survivors and victims: those who speak out, those who live in silence, those in institutional settings who we're deeply concerned about, the sons and daughters of Magdalenes, many of whom are here today and still waiting for acknowledgement, and finally the women who died behind concrete walls. And today is about those women, the Magdalene women buried here and around the country. Today is their day. For these women, last year's apology came too late. They'll never see reparation for what has happened to them, but the least we can do is ensure that they're honoured, remembered, and afforded the dignity and death that was systematically denied to them in life. I've often said that you'll know when you're talking to a Magdelene survivor because they think of others before they think of themselves. These women, all of them, are our guiding lights. Despite everything that has happened to them, Ireland's Magdelene survivors have borne their pain with a great deal more dignity, respect and emotional intelligence than the religious orders who perpetrated the abuses against them and the state that allowed it to happen. They truly are our grandmothers, our heroines and our national treasures. The women who are buried here in Magdelene graves are no different. They too are our guiding lights. Even the most cynical of us in JFM research, and we are a very cynical bunch, cannot deny the uncanny feeling that from time to time we're being looked after.
The church had a hand in it, the state looked away from it and encouraged it in many cases. And people as well, if we're honest, people tolerated this. So as women, as we come towards remembering International Women's Day, I think it's really important as Irish women that we remember the Magdalenes and that we say this will never happen again. And we've a job to make sure that this kind of treatment never occurs again. And that we recognise the women, so many of whom lost even their basic identity. So I'm delighted there's such a great crowd, and we'll be here every year for the women.
Okay. Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Martina. She's probably here watching over us today, so thanks, Claire, for your words. I'm going to introduce Mary Lou MacDonald, TD, now, who'll give us a few words, and then after that I'll take you through some of the logistics of the flower ceremony in the graveyard. So, introducing Mary Lou. Thank you.
So, Gurmila Mahagut Anya. And I think it's important just firstly to recognise again Samantha and Frankie and all of Martina's family. And you just got a glimpse there of the nature of Teenie or Martina and the carry-on of her. A great character, a very strong person, and a person who had been through the mill. A person who had the whole lot thrown at her, and she still withstood that, and she came back at them. And that's the nature of so many of the women and girls who survived the Magdalene laundries, for so many people who survived the mother and baby homes and other institutions. It is their resilience that strikes me most forcibly. Because I look at those experiences, and we're meeting here now 5 years, and some of us have worked very closely with the heroic Claire McGettrick and the other heroes and heroines of Justice for Magdalene's. So we're nearly friends at this stage. We all have a good sense of each other. And I look to some of those experiences, and at times I try to figure out how would I fare if that had been my lot? How as a human being would I have coped with it? I'm not sure that I would, is the truth. What I do know is that we have met over the course of years the consequences of hardship, of abuse, of neglect, overseen by the state. The book stops with the state. The book stops with the society in which we lived, which tolerated this, as I said in those words. You see all of that, but you also see the triumph of human courage, of dignity, when you have been disrespected in such a base, relentless, vicious way. Because the most degrading thing you can do to any person is to take their name, to take their identity, to deny them the dignity of existence. And yet these women and their families rallied back. So today we remember them. Let's also remember not just the fact of their brutalisation, but the fact too of their resilience. And let's take our cue from that. Because Claire is right when she says, we haven't learned the big lessons yet. We just haven't as a society, but we must. And let's say each to each other that we are going to ensure that those lessons are learned. As women in particular, although this is also an issue for men, but for women in particular, that we will not tolerate for ourselves, for our sisters, for our daughters, a society in which women, firstly, are regarded still as second-class citizens. That's not good enough. And others who may be vulnerable, who may be down on their luck, who may be in difficult circumstances, that they're disrespected and disregarded too. Not good enough. Not good enough. It was never, ever good enough. In fact, it was entirely outrageous. So Martina represents the spirit of the women, I think, really quite brilliantly. And the Margaret that Claire talked about, who was sent to court for concealing the crime of an illegitimate child. When you looked at the newspaper report, she was from East Wall. So those of us that are dubs, none of this was a million miles away from us. Where I grew up not knowing, but within a stone's throw of the Bethany home over on the south side. This was part and parcel of the society and the communities in which we live. That's the hard reality of it. Incredible work has been done. It is incredibly important to find the final resting place of these women and to mark it accurately. So I want to commend everybody who's been involved in all of that work and its ongoing work. There is an issue around the Magdelene report, around the Commission of Investigation, around the story that has not yet been told, still the full story of the Magdalene women. and the mother and baby homes, north and south and east and west. And all of that is work that must be done. We have to reconcile ourselves and confront the realities of what the state did. But the instincts of the state is to circle the wagons and to minimise and to play down the significance of what happened. That's not good for us. What's good for us is the truth. What's good for us is to look this experience in the eye and then to resolve never, ever again. I want to commend Anya Downs. This was Anya's brainchild. Flowers for the Magdelene. Anya is one of Sinn Féin women's finest, and this event has grown from year to year because of its simplicity, and because we mark as a matter of respect the passing of each and every one of these women, and because as people we know that it should never have happened, and I hope as people we are committed to ensuring that where it is still happening, that we identify it, that we stop it, and we actually create a system and a society in which people are valued. We're coming again towards International Women's Day. This is our most significant event every year for International Women's Day as Irish women and men. We're also in a historic year of commemoration of the Rising, and Manon and Heron were central to those revolutionary times and acts and deeds. And I'll finish with this thought. Tell me this: how would the Margaret Skinneders and Constance Markiewicz's and Molly O'Reilly's, how would they have viewed the experiences of our women and girls in those awful institutions, incarcerated, stripped of their identity and stripped of their dignity? I think we know the answer to that. And tell me this then: how would those same heroic Irish women patriots regard us now if we don't fully and faithfully record what happened and to whom and where these women are laid to rest, and to find out what happened and to whom behind the walls of mother and baby homes, so-called, and other institutions of detention, and what happened and what will happen to adoptees, to persons whose lives were turned tipsy-turvy, many of whom now seek their own pathway back to their identity. What would they think if we didn't finish that work? I think we know the answer to that question as well. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you in particular to Martina's family, but thank you to you all. We are at this stage almost like one family. That's how I like to think of us now, and we will continue this journey. There's a number of elected reps here. I'm not going to mention all of you, please bear with me, but I do need to mention two, and I think you'll understand why they are. Deputy Carol Nolan and Deputy Louise O'Reilly. Have we any other deputies? There are two newly elected women, and Deputy Maureen O'Sullivan, my constituency colleague. And I left Maureen's name to last, not in deference to her seniority. The two women, Maureen, are new kids on the block with us now. And of course, people who are in elected positions have a special responsibility on these issues. And I know that all of us and others right across the political spectrum will be on this journey also in the 32nd also. Gurumila Mahagwiv Rish, thank you for being here. Thank you to Glasnevin for the facilities. And above all, a word of recognition and respect again to all of the women who today we will mark and honour and remember.
From Justice for Magdalene's and everybody who making along today. So that ends this part of our event today. We're now going to move out into the graveyard and we're going to start our Flowers for Magdelene ceremony. So what that includes is we're going to visit 5 plots and we're going to ask everybody to lay a flower on each in remembrance of the women. So what I would ask everyone to do is to firstly keep enough flowers for each one. For anyone who doesn't have any, there's a limited amount up here. Take 5, 1 for each plot, and take them with you. Ask everybody to stay together. Just we're quite a large group, which is great, but just try and stay together so that we don't lose anybody. 2 friends, Nikki and Emer, who are at the back. If Nikki and Emer could hold up their hand, they're going to be our guides as well. One at the front and one at the back. So if anyone gets lost, grab one of them. And okay, and that's it, everybody. So thanks a million, and we'll see you all downstairs. Okay.
I picked them up.
Now,